Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this August meeting of the Local Review Body. Can I please inform all members of the public and officers that today's meeting will be recorded and will be available on the Council's website following the meeting. Can I ask any of you who have an electronic device to please have it on silent or preferably switched off. I'm Councillor Lewis Simpson. I'm the convener of the Local Review Body, and I'm joined today on my left by Councillor Willie Wilson, on my immediate right by Councillor Tom Gray. Beside him is Councillor Henry Anderson, who is today's substitute, and on the far right is Mr David Harrison, who's the planning advisor to the LRB. He is not part of the planning department and has had no previous involvement in any of the applications on the agenda today. On Councillor Wilson's left is Mr Jeff Fogg, who is the legal advisor to the LRB. On his left is Danny Williams of Committee Services. We also have the table of Mina in charge of the IT, which is all going to work fine today. Mina, is it? Good, yes. And in the back row from the Planning Service, Persephone Beer. Welcome, Persephone. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest by members in any item on the agenda today? I can answer that one myself, and I have an interest in item 4.1, and we'll leave the room while that is considered. Can we note the minute of the last meeting, colleagues? And I shall now leave the room. Please don't forget to come and get me when you're finished.
Members, I'd be obliged if one of you could agree to act as convener for the purposes of getting through the first item 4.1 in the absence of Councillor Simpson.
Happy to agree to that.
In that case, I'm happy to volunteer, given the suggestion by my colleagues, and I'll move slightly over here. Good morning, everyone. I'm just taking over temporarily because Councillor Simpson's had to leave. We'll move on to item 4.1, which is a planning application for the erection of a dwelling house in principle at land 20 metres east of Bellevue Cottage, Oakbank Road in Giltown. Now, do we have anybody here who's an interest in it? Hello, good morning. Would you like to identify yourselves just for the notes of the meeting? Okay, thank you for your attendance. Now, Mr Harrison, as our planning advisor, would you like to take us through this one, please?
Thank you, Convener. Can I first of all check that people can hear what I'm saying? Thank you. As you say, Convener, this is a planning application in principle for the erection of a dwelling house at land 20 metres east of Bellevue, Oakbank Road, Giltown. The application site concerns an area of garden ground to the side and the rear of the applicant's house. Access would be gained via the existing entry serving the applicant's house, continuing along the northern side of the property to the rear garden area. A house known as Nurse's Cottage and a group of lock-up garages lie to the north. Further housing lies to the south and west. An area of woodland proposed as a housing development lies to the east. Now, I'll just take you through some photographs of the site and the surroundings now, but you might like to have page 85 before you. That provides basically the location plan and the site plan. The general sequence of the photographs will be approaching along Northfield Road and Oakbank Road, the proposed access and house plot, the garage lock-up area, and then finally access to the proposed housing development. So say in the first photograph here, this is us standing, as it were, in Northfield Road, approaching from that side towards the Nurse's Cottage. You see identified there, the right-hand side of the photograph. and the turn-in into Oakbank Road itself. So moving up, as it were, a little bit from that position, we're at, shall we say, that junction I mentioned of Oakbank Road and Northfield, and there's the nurses' cottages, and also we have the applicant's house, Bellevue, or the roof of it, in view as well on the right-hand side of the photograph. So moving slightly to the right of that and up into Oakbank Road, we see the application site identified in red there, or I say the access into the application site, and of course the applicant's property as well. The extent of the property shown with the blue line. Moving up again a little from that, we get that frontage in more detail, and then swinging round to the left of that photograph, we get the entrance that's been formed and enlarged slightly to serve the application site, which is straight ahead, identified in red as it were, but also the applicant's property on the right-hand side of the photograph. So from that position again, swinging round slightly to the left, we just get a detail of that corner of the access and the junction between that and the property known as Nurse's Cottage. And basically, I'm assuming that the fence which is within the hedge there identifies the actual legal boundary between the two properties. It would seem to suggest that the hedge, shall we say, is within the applicant's control, just to clarify that point. Again, swinging slightly to the left of that, we get the access serving Nurse's house. So moving on from that, moving slightly to the right again, we see the parking area, which appears to have been formed relatively recently and is referred to in the papers as such, in association with the applicant's house, Bellevue. And then swinging to the left of that again, we see as an area of gravel down the side of Bellevue, and of course we have the boundary with the access proposed to the application site shown there with the new fence that's been erected. Moving slightly to the right of that to the left of that photograph, we have that access and Nurse's Cottage, just to show you the relationship there. And beyond that, number 3 Northfield Road. So we, as it were, move down the access now into, as it were, the main body of the application site. This is the latter part of it. And you can see a garage on the left-hand side of the photograph, which is associated with Nurse's Cottage. And moving down to the end of that, we get to the corner where we, as it were, enter into the main body of the application site. So there'll now be a sequence of photographs as we swing round from that same position, swing round to the left-hand side. So this is us looking down the back, as it were, of the boundary which would be created between the applicant's property and the plot at this point. So swinging round to the left of that, we're looking across the application site to the far boundary, and shall we say the woodland beyond that, which will appear in a later photograph, which is part of the housing site as proposed. Swinging around again to the left of that, from the same position, we're now looking down the other boundary, the northern boundary of the application site, and you're just catching the roof of number 3 Northfield Road at the same time. Swinging around to the left of that again, from the same position, this is us now looking to Northfield Road and the former or local authority housing in that area across the proposed access which was put forward in the previous consent for the development of the site. So that's the garage area and looking across the access, and there'll be some more photographs of that a little later on. So swinging around again to the left of that, we're catching the garage in the back area of Nurse's Cottage, and of course the roof of Nurse's Cottage. Continuing to swing round again to the left, we're looking back down to where we started off, as it were, down an Oakbank Road and the access there. So moving on from that position, we now move to, as it were, to the far corner. That's the southeastern corner of the application site, looking back to what would become the rear boundary of Bellevue. Swinging round to the right of that, we're still catching a little bit of Bellevue, but of course we're catching Nurse's Cottage as well. And swinging round to the right of that again, we're looking down to the back of the garage courtyards and the local authority housing beyond. And swinging round again to the right of that photograph, we as it were looking over that boundary, looking in easterly direction into the area of land which is largely wooded at the moment, which would be part of a housing site in the future. Moving on from that position, we now move into Northfield Road, looking at the position of the access proposed in the previous application. So just one or two pictures of that garage courtyard. So swinging slightly to the left of that, we catch the two existing garages that are on the site, which front directly onto Northfield Road, and you're just catching the roof of a garage which is set behind those, but within that same garage area. So if we move into the garage area, we get a detail of that garage that's set to the rear of the two which front onto Northfield Road. Moving on from that, we then go back into Northfield Road and catch the frontage of number 3 Northfield Road, adjacent to the garages, of course. And then moving up that towards the corner, which you see in the location plan, you catch the corner of number 3 Northfield Road, or its garage, and this is the position of one of the accesses into the housing site, which goes on the eastern side of the applicant's property. So that's one aspect of that corner, and swinging slightly to the left of that, we catch the remainder of it. So I'll just leave you with that general photograph of the entry to the application site. Turning now, first of all, in summary to the applicant's case, planning permission was granted for the erection of a house in the rear garden area of Bellevue in 2017. Access was to be gained from Northfield Road using an existing entry serving the adjoining garage lock-up area to the north. The council, as housing authority, had already granted approval for this access to be used to serve the plot in 2016. However, when the plot was put up for sale, a complaint was submitted to the council on the basis that the proposal would infringe access to a garage. The housing authority then withdrew its approval for the access. The reason given was that the change of use of land will affect future potential development of the council's land. The applicant notes that the proposed change of use was made known to the housing authority at the time of approval being given 2 years earlier. The original proposal was not viewed as forming backland development. As illustrated in the papers submitted, the applicant has been in conversation and correspondence with the planning and housing services of the council. In relation to this application, the applicant believes that they were advised that the proposed access would provide a reasonable alternative and were not advised that it would be unacceptable. It is not considered that there is a significant difference between the alternative access and that previously approved in terms of its impact on the amenity of adjoining houses. That existing access has been that's the applicant's existing access, has been widened and the previous garage and sheds removed to enable access to the rear. The alternative access would enter the plot at the same corner. A turning facility has also been formed for the benefit of Bellevue. The revised access is from an unadopted road. Since the original application, it is noted that planning permission has been granted recently for a housing development on the land to the east of the application site, with access being taken from Northfield Road between two houses. By comparison to the applicant's proposed access, this is seen as creating significant noise pollution for those existing adjoining houses. The applicant has also approached the housing authority with a view to purchasing an access route through the garage area, but has not received a response. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, excuse me. The site lies within the settlement of Guildtown. The local development plan policies broadly support the efficient use of infill land for housing, where this respects the character of and makes a positive contribution to the environment of the area. this site was granted planning permission for a house in 2016. It was seen as being physically capable of accommodating that development in a positive way, provided it was limited to a single-storey height with dormers, without dormers, to avoid overlooking and overshadowing. That application site identified access being gained through the lock-up garage area to the north. As such, the proposal was not assessed as constituting residential backland development because it would not raise the prospective conflicts where driveways pass close to and between houses. By contrast, this revised proposal seeks to take access between Bellevue and the district nurse's cottage. The access would also be shared between Bellevue and the proposed house. This arrangement is not seen as acceptable due to the impact on the surrounding residential amenity from noise and disturbance to the residents of these houses. The plans submitted do not demonstrate that Bellevue would have a suitable level of parking provision and turning facilities. Although no indicative site plan was submitted with the application, the proposed plot is seen as having sufficient space to accommodate a house and the associated private amenity space. In this case, there are no representations received. There is a request for a site visit and a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks very much indeed, Mr Harrison. And now we proceed to ask members if there's any questions on the application for Mr Harrison. Councillor Anderson?
No questions.
Councillor Gray?
No questions.
I one or two questions, Mr Harrison. I think in the papers we've got, it seems clear that there's an existing consent for the plot with an access from an alternative, the garage site. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And that is still live?
It's an extant consent, yes.
And
It has worked.
okay. We're not allowed to
Oh, beg your pardon.
discussion, but if it's a
apologies.
point
Thank
of
you.
clarification, then that will Mr Fogg, do you want to give advice on that?
Only that, if we look at the papers, my understanding was it lapsed in February of this year.
Oh, I
Okay,
beg your
so
pardon.
it's recently lapsed. Yeah, right. Okay, we're agreed on that. And we're here now because the council housing service who previously gave a consent for access and alternative access have now indicated that's no longer the case.
They've indicated they withdraw that consent, yes.
And in your summary, Mr Harrison, you said that the applicant had initially been given an indication that the proposed access might be acceptable. Did I hear that correctly?
Now, when you say the proposed access before you today,
Yes.
well, that they believe that through the various exchanges of correspondence, that first of all, they weren't told that it was unacceptable, and their understanding was that it would be acceptable.
Okay, right. Thanks for that clarification. And my final question is, within the papers that we have before us, it seems to me that there is an agreement that the plot is capable of having the capacity for a dwelling house of the type proposed. Is that?
Well, certainly the officer
Yeah.
has no concern
Yeah.
regarding that aspect.
Okay, thank you. I'll just formally ask again if there are any further points, any questions anybody wants to raise. I don't think so. Okay. I think we then go to a preliminary decision. Ask my colleagues if they think that we have sufficient information before us, the information contained within the papers, the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Anderson.
Happy to proceed.
Okay. Councillor Gray. Yeah. I would concur. I think we have sufficient information to proceed today. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. This is very marginal. We have a planning consent which was issued by this council. It is now extant, but in fact it was then questioned after it was approved. The site is perfectly suitable for a house. The access proposed is actually on the applicant's land. Therefore, he pays she bears the brunt of any discomfort thanks to this application. This is a village context here where there are, you know, this Oakbank Road or the track, that part, is it still called Oakbank Road that Bellevue comes off? Yes, is an unmade up road. This driveway would be no lesser of a road surface, I'm sure. It would serve Bellevue. It would serve the plot behind Bellevue being developed by Bellevue. Frankly, in view of I've got to say the council's slip up somewhere along the line between housing and planning, it seems evident to me there's been one. Due to this, I find it very difficult to justify restricting the applicant at this stage, and therefore I would recommend we approve this application.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson next.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, this is quite a difficult one.
Can you do your microphone, please?
Sorry. This is quite a difficult one, but I would concur with my colleague, and looking at the photos, certainly you can't get out and in of Bellevue in a forward gear, but when one sees the way of the setup there, you wouldn't be reversing out onto this shared access. You could quite easily go in forward gear, reverse back into where we've seen the car and come out. So I don't see an issue with the vehicles alighting from Bellevue. It was sort of talked about. The noise issue for neighbours, that's quite a high hedge. Well, it's a hedge that any vehicles going up the side of will certainly deflect a lot of the noise away from the neighbouring house. And if that hedge is kept in place, or a acoustic fence if the hedge had to come down, I actually don't see an issue. So I would accept that the applicants I would uphold the applicant's appeal.
Okay, thank you. Clearly there's irrespective of my view, there's a majority opinion, but for what it's worth, I'll give my summary of the situation. This has been a kind of bit of history attached to this application. We're judging what we've got before us today, and although Councillor Gray was referring to the land issue history, and we're here to look at a planning application. It's quite clear to me that the plot is capable of taking a house, technically. And the only issue that we're really in discussion on is whether this access, the alternative access, is suitable. And on balance, I consider it is suitable. First of all, although there has been some work done with fencing, etc., which I'm bound to say is slightly jumping the gun. However, one of the advantages of that is we can see in the photographs what the effect of that is, and one is that clearly there is sufficient parking at Bellevue for a reasonable number of cars. I don't know, nowadays folk have 1, 2, 3 and 4 cars sometimes, but for a reasonable number of cars I think there is sufficient turning space and parking for both plots, Bellevue and the proposed house. On the residential amenity side, I think that the main house that is affected is a Nurse's Cottage, and if the previous consent had the road going at the back of Nurse's Cottage, to me the residential amenity issue is only marginally affected by there being another side of the cottage there. The other thing that is important to me, I think, is that Transport Planning have raised no objection. Oakbank Road is an unadopted road. Having seen it again, I'm fairly familiar with it, but having seen it again, it needs some TLC. I think that's entirely up to the owners of the road to see to. But I don't think speeding is going to be an issue, and I don't think road safety is an issue at all as far as that's concerned. So I would, concluding, I would concur with my colleague's view that we should grant the application. Mr Harrison, I don't know if you want to give us any advice, first of all, or Mr Fogg, about conditions, but I just wonder if there's a potential condition to have a landscaping plan that would allow infilling, if I can put it, of the hedging that's round about, that might protect the amenity both of the nurse's cottage and the new house and Bellevue. But you can advise me of the competency of that suggestion right away.
Thank you, Convener. As you've decided to grant consent, in this instance, of course, there is a previous consent we're being referred to, and there are a number of conditions in that. And I would probably suggest that, shall we say, provides a model for the decision notice that might be issued. Obviously, basically, we're dealing with the same site, albeit with a different access. That did refer to the provision of SUDS facility. I would also draw attention to the fact that there's a need for a developer contribution in relation to education and transport, and a condition to that effect, should the actual consent be taken up, would be appropriate. There's also reference to the need for landscaping on boundaries, and that's really all the advice I would give you, particularly because you have already a relatively recent decision on the main bulk of the land.
Okay, so these previous conditions to the previous application, if I can put it that way,
provide a model for it,
could be carried forward in your professional opinion, and that includes the landscaping.
Well, there would seem to be no reason to depart from that.
Are my colleagues in agreement with Mr Harrison's suggestion? Okay, Mr Fogg, have you any further advice to give us? No? Okay. So we proceed then. The decision is that the application, the review is approved, and there is a consent for the house. Clearly, any consent creates, in some people's view, a precedent. My answer to that is every application is judged on its own merits, and we've done that today. Thank you for your attendance, and you're free to go. Thank you. We'll recall the convener. I'd like to thank Councillor Anderson for his assistance today. He's allowed to leave the room. Okay. Thank you.
Right, we'll move on now to item 5.1, which is deferred application for review for the erection of a wind turbine and ancillary equipment, Aviva headquarters, Perth, Perth. Is there anybody here from that application?
Yes, I'm Fiona Beale. I'm head of real estate at Aviva.
Oh, welcome. Mr Harrison, can I ask you to introduce the application for review?
Thank you, Convener. As you said, this is a detailed planning application for the erection of a wind turbine and ancillary equipment at the Aviva headquarters, Perth, Perth. The application site is located at the eastern end of the main car park at a level of around 91 ADO. It would be some 77 metres to blade tip, 55 metres to hub level, with a blade diameter of some 44 metres. It would be some 40 metres from the Aviva building and some 50 metres from the former sports centre. The generating capacity would be between 800 and 900 kilowatts. A transformer kiosk and associated engineering works would form part of the proposal. You might like to make reference to page 484, which provides you a location plan, and 485, the site plan, and 486, the turbine itself. The viewpoints provided are on page 496. There are no photographic presentations with this proposal, principally because, of course, we have the photomontages provided by the applicant, and they are, of course, provided at a larger scale for you in comparison to what you have in your papers here. So you may at some point wish to make reference to them. They're laid out there. Just to turn, first of all, in summary to the applicant's case, the papers relating to this application are, of course, extensive. The following summary focuses on the planning statement alone. The applicant aspires to reach a 100% renewable energy sourced generation as an international exemplar at this location. A wind turbine of this capacity is seen as the only means towards achieving this aim by providing some 50% of the electricity required. The proposal seeks to respond to climate change, carbon emissions, and renewable energy targets. The overall investment, including grant assistance from Scottish Government, would be some £3 million. A more decentralised and urban setting for wind turbines is seen as desirable in this context. The applicant's response to the local development plan considerations may be summarised as follows. First of all, under policy ER1A, renewable energy and low carbon energy, this concerns offers broad support for such development. The proposal is seen as complying with criteria A within that policy. The applicant's landscape and visual impact assessment predicts that, firstly, the adverse impacts at close to medium range on the urban and lowland hills landscape character types would be moderate or minor, more often minor at long range, and not likely to be significant overall. Secondly, at close range on the M90, Core Paths, Craigie Hill Golf Course and Canoe Hill, at close to moderate range, the effects would be moderate or minor and not likely to be significant overall. Thirdly, there would be no likely significant effects on the Sidlaw Hills and Ochil Hills special landscape areas. It is considered that the Council and SNH have not demonstrated how they have arrived at the contrary assessment that there would be significant detrimental impact, notably when the mitigating effects of woodland and visual barriers are taken into account. The site is separated from the adjoining M90 corridor by woodland, and the nearest houses are some 350 metres away. This locality contains modern housing of different styles and forms, offices and motorway services. It is also noted that there are pylons some 1.2 kilometres to the southwest and telecommunications masts on Mailer Hill and St Magdalene's Hill. It is concluded that while the turbine would be clearly visible from a small number of localised visual receptors, no significant effects on visual amenity are predicted, and the proposal is seen as according with local development plan policies ER1A and ED1A. The applicant considers that wind turbines are viewed by many as modern works of kinetic art and symbolic of sustainable development. Under policy HE2, concerning listed buildings, the potential effect on the setting of the category A listed building which adjoins is acknowledged. The applicant concurs with Historic Environment Scotland's view that there is a moderate significant impact on this listed building. While this could be reduced by relocating the turbine, this cannot be achieved within the applicant's land while maintaining separation distances with housing and the M90. However, these impacts are seen as acceptable when balanced against the benefits secured from the development. Views out from the building and the building itself would not be affected. The brutalist concrete style of the building, its detailing and stepped forms are seen as being capable of accommodating the turbine within its setting. The turbine is also seen as enabling development as a means of retaining the listed building and its present use. Under policy EP8 concerning noise pollution, the applicant's noise impact assessment concludes that there will be no detrimental impact on residential amenity, and the proposal therefore complies with this policy. This conclusion has not been disputed by Environmental Health, who seek further background information. And of course, further information has been provided, and this is on page 1187 onwards. Policy EP8 does not refer to shadow flicker. In the worst case, some 191 properties could, potentially and technically, be affected. In practice, only the Aviva building and the adjacent sports centre are expected to be affected. Such effects could be mitigated through a planning condition requiring the installation of an electronic controller to pause the rotor automatically. And again, there is further information provided in this on page 1329 onwards. Under policy ED1A, employment and mixed-use areas, the Council seems to accept that all aspects of this policy are met with the exception of Part A concerning residential amenity. There are many wind energy schemes in close proximity to housing. While this would be a large and prominent structure when viewed in close proximity, it is not seen as overbearing or dominant due to the separation distance to housing and due to existing trees. The economic and environmental benefits of the proposal are seen as outweighing the adverse impacts. While like most EIA developments, the proposal identifies some significant environmental impacts, it does not follow that the impact of the proposal as a whole is significant. Additionally, a community trust fund is also envisaged, which will provide a minimum of some £5,000 to local organisations and charities. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the broad policy support from Scottish and UK government for proposals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is recognised, and this is reflected in TAY Plan Policy 7 and Local Development Plan Policy ER1. Support within the Local Development Plan Policy is dependent upon the proposal fulfilling a number of criteria. In essence, the Planning Officer considers that the proposal is contrary to ER1A, Criteria A, due to aspects of the potential impact on landscape character, visual integrity, the historic environment, cultural heritage, and residential amenity. Also, the site is part of an area identified as economic land covered by Local Development Plan Policy ED1A, which seeks to retain employment. Criteria A states proposals should not detract from the amenity of adjoining, especially residential, areas. Again, the planning officers consider that the proposal is contrary to that policy and criteria. It is also noted that the site is adjacent to the M90 and Perth Green Belt, which lie to the south. Turning to landscape and visual impact, the applicant's environmental impact assessment, zones of theoretical visibility study, and the associated photomontages and resultant assessment regarding the potential visual impact have been considered. It is noted that these assessments conclude that the proposed turbine would have no overall significant effect on the rural landscape or urban area of Perth. Although the turbine would be clearly visible from a small number of localised receptors, the applicant's assessment predicts no significant effect on visual amenity. The planning officer does not concur with this conclusion. The officer, and Scottish Natural Heritage share the view that the assessment underplays the impact of the turbine in the landscape and the surrounding area, and consider that there would be significant landscape and visual effects on residents and visitors to Perth from within the city and the major tourist routes passing the city. The visualisations are seen as demonstrating that the turbine would appear as an uncharacteristic and prominent feature when open to view. It is anticipated that the turbine would become the most visible tall structure on the edge of the, inverted commas, bowl containing the city. In addition, the moving blades are expected to exacerbate the impact by drawing the viewer's eye to this prominent feature. The applicant's assessment states that within 500 metres, and I quote, the turbine would be fully screened from the majority of Perth urban area. This is not seen as capturing the repeated, open, unrestricted views of the turbine by residents and visitors as they move around the city. Considering the turbine's elevated position, the large number of residents and visitors within a 5-kilometre radius, and the number of people passing on major routes, that's the A9, A90 and M90, the applicant's assessment that there is no significant landscape and visual effects is not accepted by the officer. Consequently, the proposal is seen as being contrary to Local Development Plan Policy ER1A due to a significant detrimental impact on landscape character, visual integrity, the historic environment, cultural heritage, and residential amenity. Turning now to cultural heritage, the Aviva building is listed Category A. The environmental impact assessment acknowledges that the turbine would be a prominent feature which would disrupt the architectural composition between what is described as the ground scraping building, the terraced hillside, and trees. The officer considered that it would break the skyline, be distracting, and compete visually with the listed building. Attention is drawn to the description of the building when it was listed in 2017. This is set out on page 1107 and 1108. This emphasises the importance of the relationship between the listed building and its setting, being integral to its architectural and historic interest. In this context, a 77-metre turbine, combined with the movement of its blades, in such close proximity, is viewed as having a significant detrimental impact on that setting. This is not seen as being outweighed by an improvement in the energy source for the building. Historic Environment Scotland has objected to the proposal because it raises issues of national interest for this important heritage asset, notably the impact on close-range views as illustrated by viewpoints 1 and 5. The turbine is expected to become the dominating element, disrupting the overall composition and redefining its focus. Beg your pardon. Beg your pardon. In concurring with these views, the officer concludes that the proposal is contrary to Local Development Policy HE2 listed buildings and the relevant part of Scottish planning policy, that's paragraph 141. Additionally, the proposal is seen as having a detrimental impact on the setting of Pittheaflis Castle, a Category A listed building, and Pittheaflis Cottages, Category B listed buildings. In conclusion, the prospective economic and environmental benefits of the proposal in generating renewable energy are not considered to outweigh the adverse impacts which are viewed as significant. Most notably, the proposal is considered to be contrary to local development policies ER1A, HE2, ED1A, and potentially EP8. Turning now to representations, 5 objections mainly concerning the adverse impact on visual amenity and the character of the area, the inappropriate nature of the land use, noise and safety concerns have been submitted. There are also 7 letters of support. In this case, there is a request for a site visit. There is no formal request for a hearing, although the applicant has indicated a willingness to submit further information in relation to economic and environmental matters and the scale of investment involved in this proposal. They consider that this information might be provided either through a hearing or via submissions. You have, of course, additional information submitted in relation to noise and shadow flicker. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr Harrison. Colleagues, before we come to questions, I propose we take a moment to look at the photo montages. Okay. Thank you, colleagues. Can I ask, are there any questions for officers on the application for review? Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Well, this is in some ways a complex application, not because of the nature of what's proposed, because it's quite clear what's proposed, Convener, but given the voluminous amount of technical information we have, we're trying to sift our way through that, and it's very useful having these montages and the location plan. This is just really for Mr. Harrison. The report of handling doesn't, I don't refer in a lot of detail to other structures of antennae and communications equipment that are in the vicinity. Is that the case?
Well, you have the report of handling and it says what it says, if I can put it that way. I wouldn't assume from that the officer would be unaware of other, shall we say, structures in the locality, because obviously, first of all, the assessment by the applicant draws attention to them, apart from the fact that they probably would be familiar with them anyway, living in the locality.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Councillor Gray, any questions for you?
Yep. This being an application which has been recommended for refusal by our officers, and it having been recommended for refusal by Historic Scotland, or they have objected to it, I wonder if Mr. Hogg could clarify the procedures. Should we equally reject this application, or should we approve this application here? Exactly what procedures would occur in this case?
Convener, the letter from Historic Scotland, as Councillor Gray has indicated, intimates their objection to the application and says that in the event that the LRB was minded to uphold the application, there's a requirement in terms of the Town and Country Planning, Neighbouring Planning Authorities and Historic Environment Scotland Direction 2015 to notify the Scottish Ministers in the first instance of that determination. So it would be referred in short to the Scottish Ministers, and it would be for them thereafter to determine what further procedure they wish to follow.
And should we refuse, that would be the end of story?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Fine, Tom. I have no questions, so members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within these papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Wilson?
I think we have sufficient information to proceed, Convener.
Councillor Gray?
I agree.
I too feel we have sufficient information. So we can move to debate. Having considered the applicant's papers, the report of handling, the Perth Kinross local development plan, and all other relevant material planning considerations, I will start us off. As has been mentioned by other colleagues, there has been a huge amount of information attached to this application, but I think perhaps the key question is quite simple. Do we agree with the reasons for refusal, given that this structure, by all accounts, will be extremely prominent beside a Grade A listed building, which is, to all intents and purposes, practically invisible on the hillside? It's an area that all three of the councillors know well. I have no doubt that the reasons for the environmental reasons are to be commended for going down this route, but I feel, colleagues, that this is not the right place for such a turbine, and I'm minded to agree with most of the reasons for refusal, with one or two items of tidying up, but I'll see what you have to say as well. So, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Convener. You know, this is a very contentious one. There's no question about that. and reading the report on the application, it would seem that it has of little merit to commend it. I prefer to take another view on the reasons stated for refusal. Reason 1, policy ER1A. The report suggests that by virtue of its scale and siting, the proposed turbine would have a significant detrimental impact on landscape character, visual integrity, the historic environment, cultural heritage, and residential amenity. I suggest it would in fact have a significant positive impact. In recent years, months, indeed days, through extreme weather patterns, the past 6 months in particular through research, the global populace has become sharply aware of the critical crisis facing our planet. The clock is ticking toward an unstoppable climatic change affecting the sustainability of all aspects of land-based life. It is therefore critical that all communities embrace change from an aesthetics and amenity-first approach toward demonstrating a will to consider all possibilities towards sustainable energy production. With this in mind, the impact on landscape character and visual integrity can be viewed as a bold statement of intent towards a positive outcome and would then be pleasing rather than sore on the eye. Regarding reasons 2 and 3, policy HE2, the report alleges that the turbine would not preserve the setting of the A-listed Oviedo building. The extraordinary charm of this building is that it blends well with its surroundings to the point of being almost unnoticed by the familiar eye. For the proposed 25-year presence of the turbine, the contrasting turbine structure in the background to the listed building would have the effect of making the building even more inconspicuous, thereby accentuating its particular attribute. Regarding reason 4, I am satisfied that conditions may be applied to ensure that controlled mitigation measures may be effected to prevent the rotor turning in an unlikely occurrence of any offending noise or flicker effect caused by the turbine during operation. Reason 5 is policy ED1A. The attractiveness or otherwise of a wind turbine is highly subjective. For many years viewing turbines, I have found that the only time I'm concerned by the scores of turbines on 9 different sites I can see from my home is when some of them are not turning. Otherwise, I find them of no consequence, the fact that they're in my view. This proposed turbine would consume energy on site of production, ensuring minimal loss through transit. Public comments suggest more welcome the proposal than do not. I also welcome this proposal with conditions particularly regarding a 25-year lifespan for the turbine, with mitigating measures to counter the effects of noise and shadow flicker, and believe that this development will signal a positive statement by Perth towards challenging the greatest and immediate threat to life itself. I am happy to approve this application.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Well, I think one thing we're all agreed on is this is a challenging application. It challenges policy, it challenges principles, and it challenges practicality, I think, in a pretty fundamental way. And I'm glad we've got so much information, because we've got a lot of technical information, but what the crunch comes is to consider what the net effect of this substantial structure will be on the surrounding landscape. We live in challenging and changing times, Convener, and if we were to move back 20, 30, 40, 50 or 60 years, which is relatively recently, there would be a huge number of structures that we see prominently on the landscape just now that wouldn't have existed at all, or wouldn't have existed to the same degree. And there are some of them immediately available at Kirkton Hill and St Magdalene's Hill, I should call it, rather, which is less than a mile away, as well as the pylon line that has already been referred to. It's clear that this application does not comply with policy. That's crystal clear. And the report of handling, and I'm conscious that the author of that report's in the room, I don't think the planning officers could have come up with any different conclusion, because clearly the application does not comply with policy. But we are here to take another view on that. And on balance, my opinions tending towards Councillor Gray's view on the matter, for several reasons. First of all, the place that this will be most prominently seen from will be the motorway. And yet Transport Scotland have not raised any objections. It will stick out, there's no doubt about that. But the photomontages are very useful because in some of them, the structure will almost blend into the landscape without being seen visually at all. In others, it will be extremely prominent. I don't have a huge concern about the effect on residential amenity because unless some folk are to perch themselves on top of their roofs of their homes, they won't really see it in a normal working day. And we've become used to windmills, if I can call it that, turbines. They're part of our landscape, part of our life. One advantage of them is after X years, you can take them down. We had coal mines in the past, we had coal bins in the past, and we've ways of getting these things deconstructed if necessary. This is controversial, and it may well upset the apple cart to a fair degree if we take a decision to approve it today. But I think this is in some ways a test case. Here's a company wanting to extol its green energy credentials in a way that is pretty basic. And whilst there may be other locations that have been suggested by Historic Environment Scotland, they're not within ownership of the applicants. And there have been no constructive suggestions made as to where they might be, because I think some of the potential other ones that I could think of might be a bit more controversial than this one. So I'm going to go with approval. There'll need to be suitable conditions developed for that approval, and we'll need to have advice from both Mr Harris and Mr Fogg in that regard.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wilson. So, as you may have noticed, we don't always agree in this committee, and this is another one of those occasions. So I think, unless you have anything further to add, Councillor Gray? No. Having listened to my colleague, I think, Jeff, that's a 2-1 in favour. And over to you and Mr Harrison for the suitable conditions.
Yeah. Before we take it further, Convener, can I seek clarification both from Councillors Gray and Wilson? Because this is development affecting a listed building, it brings into play the additional legislation in the Planning Listed Building Conservation Act of 1997, specifically Section 59 of that Act, which says that in considering whether to grant planning permission for development affecting a listed building or its setting, the planning authority must have special regard to desirability of preserving the building or its setting or any features of special architectural or historic interest which it possesses. Is it your respective positions that, notwithstanding the obligation to have that special regard to preserving the building and its setting, you feel that the other factors that you've referred to this morning warrant the approval that you've referred to? I think I'd be grateful we could just get that clarification.
Well, put it this way, the setting, it doesn't affect, it is in the background of the setting. Therefore, there is nothing obstructing the view toward that from the northern side, which is the only side you can actually see the listed building from. You cannot see it from the road anyway. And as Councillor Wilson pointed out, the structure itself will be most seen from the roadway, not from houses which look toward the listed building. So, regard the setting, it's a background to the setting. You could, the background to the setting actually changes every day according to the way the clouds are moving or whether the mists come down or not. This is in the background, not affecting the view of it, and therefore, whatever you can take from that, Mr Fogg, please do.
Convener, leaving aside my views on the system we have for listing buildings, which is neither here nor there, because this one is listed at the moment. And I can understand the reasons why. I actually witnessed the building of it in 1980 and before and after that. And I'm conscious we're sitting in the predecessor building of that organisation right now. The issue about detraction, and this is, I think, what Historic Scotland are excited about, or interested in, I should say, rather than excited. That boils down eventually to a matter of opinion, and I think the turbine, if approved eventually, is prominent, will be prominent. It's got to be. You can't have something 77 metres high, convener, and sometimes because of some landscape views, and we've seen them there, it will be less prominent, or from a distance, not prominent at all. And trees are wonderful things. They grow fairly fast and cover lots of stuff. But from the view from what I still call the general accident building, but the building at Pethievlis, is largely seen from across the road at Perth Academy, if you want to see where it is. And from that, yes, the turbine will be prominent. I've got to be honest about that. But I think that's something we accept as part of life, because of the energy advantages and the climate advantages involved in it. I don't think you can hide it. I don't think it detracts from it. I think it maybe complements it as a way of expressing my opinion on it. I don't think it's going to ruin that view of this layered building that's built into the hillside and that blends in very, very well. This is going to look prominent, in my view. That's life.
Sufficient for you, Mr. Harrison? Have you anything to add to that?
I don't think I have anything further, convener, to say.
We can leave that with you.
Yeah, the conditions and the notification to Scottish ministers will take its course.
Right. Okay. So that's that one decided, and that concludes today's meeting of the local review body. Thank you for your attendance.